I didn't do what she expected me to do. That night, my wife told me to sleep on the couch. She said it the same way she always did, like it wasn't a discussion. Normally that's where it would have ended. I would have stayed quiet. And by morning, we would have acted like nothing really happened. But that night was different. I didn't argue with her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain myself. I nodded, walked into the bedroom and packed a bag. When she realized I wasn't in the apartment anymore, I was already somewhere she couldn't reach me. At the time, she thought it was just another fight. She thought I needed space. She thought I'd be back by morning. What she didn't know was that I wasn't taking space. I was leaving. I didn't see what happened to her the next day. I only heard about it later. The man who told me was calm and professional. This kind of thing was normal for him. He said she was at work when he approached her. She was standing near the reception desk talking to someone when he said her name. She knew something was wrong before he even finished his sentence. He told me her face went pale. Then her voice got loud. Not crying. Not asking questions. Yelling. People around her pretended not to notice. They stayed at their desks. They stared at their screens. He said she tried to interrupt him. Then she tried to talk over him. Then she tried to stop the moment completely. Nothing worked. I wasn't there to see any of it. I was sitting on my brother's couch holding my phone, watching it light up over and over again. I didn't answer. The calls kept coming. The messages kept stacking up. The voicemails changed fast. At first she sounded annoyed. Then she sounded angry. Then she sounded unsure. By the last voicemail, her voice didn't even sound like her anymore. I still didn't respond. Because by then I already knew something she didn't. She thought she was ahead of me. She thought she was the one planning. She had no idea I had already seen something she never meant for me to see. My name is Caleb Monroe. I'm 38 years old. I work in enterprise systems. It's a normal job. Nothing flashy. I've always believed in routine. I believed in showing up every day. I believed in building something steady and protecting it. That included my marriage. Rachel and I had history. The kind people assume is solid just because it's long. We met young. We grew up together. We built a life that looked stable from the outside. For a long time I thought that was enough. Looking back now, the problems didn't start all at once. They showed up slowly. Small changes. Little moments I explained away. I told myself I was being patient. I told myself I was being supportive. What I didn't realize was that I was missing the moment when everything started to shift. I found out the truth on a Tuesday night. I wasn't suspicious. I wasn't checking her phone. It happened by accident. And once I saw it, nothing about my life looked the same again. But that part comes later. First, you need to understand how someone can sit across from you every day and still live a completely separate life. If I'm being honest, I didn't think anything was wrong at first. That's the part people don't like to hear, but it's the truth. When you've been with someone for years, you don't jump straight to the worst conclusion. You look for reasonable explanations. You protect the picture you already believe in. Rachel started changing small things about her routine. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that felt worth questioning on its own. She said she wanted to get back in shape. Said she felt tired all the time and needed more energy. She signed up for a gym near her office. I told her that was great. I even asked if she wanted me to join her. She said no. She said she needed something that was just hers. That made sense to me. Everyone needs space. She started going a few times a week. Then more often. Sometimes early in the morning. Sometimes after work. When I asked how it was going, she talked about how intense the workouts were. She mentioned a trainer a few times. I didn't think much of it. People talk about their coworkers all the time. Why wouldn't they talk about a trainer? The next thing that changed was her phone. Rachel used to leave it everywhere. On the kitchen counter. On the coffee table. Plugged in next to the bed. She'd ask me to grab it for her. She'd hand it to me to show me something. Then that stopped. Her phone stayed face down. It stayed on silent. She took it with her everywhere. When I noticed, she already had an explanation ready. Work had gotten busier. Her team expected faster responses. She couldn't miss messages anymore. That made sense too. Her job had always been demanding. Around the same time, my own schedule got heavier. My company took on a big contract. Long days turned into late nights. I started coming home tired. Sometimes I didn't get home until after dark. Rachel never complained. She told me to focus on work. She said she understood. She said this phase wouldn't last forever. I remember thinking how supportive she was being. Looking back now, I see it differently. But at the time, I didn't question it. What bothered me more than anything else was the distance. Not arguments. Not yelling. Silence. We talked about groceries. We talked about bills. We talked about schedules. We stopped talking about anything that mattered. When I tried to ask her how she was feeling, she brushed it off. She said she was tired. She said she didn't want to get into it. Some nights we sat on the couch together and watched TV for hours. We barely said a word. I told myself this was normal. People change. Marriages go through quiet periods. Not every phase feels exciting. That's what I believed. I even blamed myself. I thought maybe I was working too much. Maybe I wasn't present enough. Maybe I was missing something obvious. So I tried harder. I checked in more. I suggested weekend plans. I asked if she wanted to get away for a couple of days. She always had a reason to say no. She was tired. She had an early morning. She just wanted to stay in. I accepted it. Because when you trust someone, you don't assume they're lying. You assume you just don't see the whole picture yet. I had no idea how wrong that assumption was. And I had no idea how close I already was to the moment that would change everything. At some point, I started feeling like something was off, but I couldn't explain what exactly. Nothing big had happened. There was no single moment I could point to and say, that's when it changed. It was more like a quiet shift I couldn't name. Rachel felt farther away even when she was sitting right next to me. She laughed at her phone more than she laughed with me. She seemed distracted, like her mind was always somewhere else. When I asked what she was thinking about, she usually said nothing. Or she said it was work. Or she said she was just tired. And again, all of that sounded reasonable. I kept telling myself I was overthinking it. I had a tendency to do that, especially when work was stressful. I didn't want to be the kind of husband who looked for problems where none existed. There were nights when I almost said something, really said something. I would start a sentence, then stop halfway through because I didn't want to turn nothing into an argument. So I swallowed it. I convinced myself that if I stayed calm and steady, things would settle on their own. The truth is, I was afraid of being wrong. I was afraid that if I said the words out loud, I'd sound paranoid. Worse than that, I was afraid she'd look at me like I didn't trust her anymore. Trust mattered to me. Probably more than it should have. One evening, I noticed she had stopped asking when I'd be home. She used to check in even casually. Now she didn't seem to care whether I was late or not. That should have bothered me more than it did. Another time I suggested we take a short trip together. Nothing fancy. Just a weekend somewhere nearby. She smiled, said it sounded nice, and then changed the subject. She never brought it up again. I remember standing in the kitchen afterward trying to figure out why that stuck with me. I told myself it meant nothing. Then there was the way she guarded her phone. I noticed it without wanting to. The way she tilted the screen away. The way she picked it up the second it buzzed. The way she took it with her even when she was just stepping into the other room. I still didn't touch it. That part is important. I didn't go looking for proof. I didn't check messages. I didn't ask for passwords. I told myself that if I ever reached that point, the marriage was already in trouble. And I wasn't ready to admit that. So I stayed quiet. I focused on work. I focused on keeping things normal. I focused on not making things worse. Tuesday night felt normal too. She took a shower after dinner. I stayed in the bedroom answering emails and half watching something on my laptop. There was nothing unusual about any of it. Until her phone started buzzing on the nightstand. It buzzed once. Then again. Then again. I didn't grab it right away. I honestly didn't even think about it. I just glanced over the way you do when a sound keeps repeating. That's when I saw the screen light up. And that's when I realized this wasn't just in my head. What I saw in that moment didn't make sense. And once something stops making sense, you can't unsee it. But what I understood next, the full meaning of it, took a little longer. I didn't grab her phone right away. That part matters. It buzzed again on the nightstand while I was answering an email. I glanced over without thinking, the way you do when a sound keeps repeating and you want it to stop. The screen was lit up. I didn't see the full message at first. I just saw the preview line. A name I didn't recognize. And a tone that didn't belong in my bedroom. It didn't look like work. It didn't look like something meant for a group chat. It definitely didn't look like something a stranger sends by accident. My stomach tightened, but I still told myself there was a reasonable explanation. There always is, right? I stayed where I was for a few seconds, hoping the phone would stop buzzing and that feeling would pass. It didn't. The screen lit up again. And then again. That's when I picked it up. Not to search. Not to dig. Just to see what was right there. Her passcode hadn't changed. It was the same one she'd used for years. I didn't even think about it. My hands were moving faster than my head. What I saw didn't come at me all at once. It unfolded. The top of the thread was recent. Casual at first. Familiar in a way that didn't sit right with me. Then I scrolled. Just a little. That's when I realized this wasn't new. This wasn't one message. Or two. Or a misunderstanding. This had history. I sat down on the edge of the bed because my legs didn't feel steady anymore. The shower was still running in the other room. Steam was creeping under the door. Everything else in the apartment felt normal, almost peaceful. The screen in my hand said otherwise. I kept scrolling. I saw dates that went back months. I saw conversations that didn't need explaining because they explained themselves. I saw parts of my life reflected back at me in a way that made my chest feel hollow. There were jokes about things I didn't know about. Comments about days I remembered clearly, but apparently only half of them were real. At some point I stopped feeling shocked and started feeling cold. That was the shift. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I didn't feel angry the way I thought I would. I felt clear. Clear in a way that scared me. I understood then that whatever this was, it wasn't impulsive. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't something that had just happened. This had been happening while I was sitting across from her at dinner, while we watched TV together, while I asked her how her day was and believed the answer. I took screenshots. Not out of rage. Not out of revenge. Out of instinct. I sent them to an email account she didn't know existed. I was careful. Methodical. Calm in a way that didn't feel normal for the situation. When I finished, I put the phone back exactly where it had been. The shower turned off a few minutes later. Rachel came into the bedroom wrapped in a towel, like she had 100 times before. She smiled at me and asked if I was coming to bed. I looked at her and realized something else had changed. I wasn't confused anymore. I said I'd be there in a minute. She nodded, climbed into bed, and fell asleep like nothing in the world had shifted. I stayed awake. I stared at the ceiling and started planning. Not the future. Not what came next. Just the next right move. By morning, I knew I wouldn't be staying. But I also knew I wasn't leaving empty-handed. The next morning felt normal in the worst possible way. Rachel woke up before me, got dressed, and moved around the kitchen like she always did. Coffee. Toast. Her phone on the counter, face down. She asked if I wanted eggs. I said no. She didn't notice anything was off. Or maybe she did and decided not to ask. Either way, we talked about nothing important. Work stuff. A bill that was due. What day trash pickup was. I kept listening to her voice and thinking how strange it was that it sounded exactly the same. When she left for work, she kissed me on the cheek and told me she'd be late. I nodded and watched the door close behind her. That was the moment I started moving. I didn't pack everything. Just what mattered. Clothes for a few days. My laptop. Documents. The things I knew I'd need if this turned into something bigger than a breakup. I opened our shared folder and downloaded copies of everything. Bank statements. Insurance. The lease. I wasn't emotional about it. I was practical. Once you see something clearly, you stop hesitating. By noon, I had called a lawyer. Not because I wanted a fight. Because I didn't want to be unprepared. He asked simple questions. How long we'd been married. Whether there were joint accounts. Whether I had proof of what I was claiming. I told him yes. He didn't sound surprised. Apparently, nothing about this story was new to him. After that, I drove to my brother's place. I hadn't planned on telling him anything yet, but I didn't want to be alone. When he opened the door and looked at me, he knew something was wrong without me saying a word. I told him the short version. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer advice. He just said I could stay as long as I needed. That night, Rachel texted asking if I was coming home. I told her I wasn't. She asked why. I said we'd talk later. My phone rang a few minutes after that. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. I turned it off. For the first time in months, maybe longer, my head felt quiet. I wasn't trying to figure out what she meant. I wasn't replaying conversations. I wasn't questioning myself. I knew exactly what I'd seen. And I knew exactly what it meant. By the time I went to sleep, I wasn't wondering if I was doing the right thing. I was already past that. We met a few days later. Not because I needed answers. Because there was one thing I needed to say out loud, for myself. We didn't meet at home. That place was already done for me. We met at a small cafe near her office. Neutral ground. No memories attached. She was already there when I walked in. Sitting straight. Hands folded. Like she had rehearsed this moment. She asked how I was. I said I was okay. She started talking almost immediately. Said I misunderstood the message. Said it looked worse than it was. Said the guy didn't mean anything. Said she felt lonely and didn't know how to talk to me about it. I let her talk. Not because I needed explanations, but because I wanted to hear how far she would go without actually telling the truth. At some point she stopped and looked at me waiting. Waiting for anger. Waiting for relief. Waiting for me to say we could fix it. Instead, I said something she wasn't ready for. I told her I already knew enough. She frowned and asked what that meant. So I explained it slowly. I said this wasn't about one message or one person. It was about the months before that. The distance. The silence. The way I kept adjusting myself to avoid tension. The way I stopped trusting my own instincts because she kept telling me I was overreacting. She tried to pull it back. Said all couples go through this. Said we just needed to communicate better. Said she was willing to try. That was the moment everything shifted. Not in the conversation. Inside me. I realized something very clearly. I wasn't sitting there because I wanted to save the marriage. I was sitting there because I needed to stop abandoning myself. And once I saw that, there was no going back. I told her I wasn't interested in fixing something that required me to stay confused. I said I didn't want a relationship where honesty only appears after it's discovered. She went quiet. Then she asked if I was really ready to throw everything away. I told her I wasn't throwing anything away. I was stepping out of something that no longer included me. We talked about practical things after that. Accounts. Paperwork. Who would move what and when. Her voice sounded calm, but her hands were shaking. When we stood up to leave, she asked one last time if I was sure. I looked at her and felt something I hadn't expected. Nothing dramatic. Just clarity. I said yes. That was the end. The days after that were strange. Quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar. No tension in the air. No guessing. No waiting for the next explanation. At first, the silence felt heavy. Then it started to feel clean. I noticed how much energy I had been spending trying to understand her moods. Trying to keep things stable. Trying to be patient enough that honesty would eventually show up. Walking away didn't make me stronger overnight. But it stopped the slow erosion I had been living with. And that was my point X. Not when I saw the message. Not when I confronted her. But when I understood that staying would cost me more than leaving ever could. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need closure from her. I didn't need the full story. I needed to choose myself without explaining it 10 different ways. If you're listening to this and something in your chest feels tight, pay attention to that. Confusion is not a phase you're supposed to live in forever. Love isn't meant to make you doubt your own reality. Sometimes closure doesn't come from answers. It comes from the moment you stop negotiating your worth. Thank you for being here. If this story spoke to you, subscribe to Elfix Tales for more stories about betrayal, transformation, and closure. And leave a comment below. I read every single one and reply personally. Your voice matters. Your story matters.